Hey guys, it's your boy Wolf. I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm kind of breezing through this, but this is my second time recording this episode. Apparently, the first one either didn't save or didn't want to save, or who knows. Um, you know, I upgraded this to have an AI companion, and the AI companion absolutely sucks. So let's just leave it at that. But we just got through a long weekend of professional wrestling, and I'm not going to sit here and comment on every show, every match. But I thought the best show overall was AEW All In. I thought the best match was Hangman versus John Moxley. And the surprise of the weekend, really, for me, was Gunther and getting 16 minutes out of Goldberg. Um, Definitely was not his most exciting match, but it was probably his best technical pro wrestling match. Um, they even mentioned how it was like 20 some years since he wrestled over 10 minutes. And so that was just impressive. I enjoyed the match. I think the one thing they could have did differently was the finish. I think the finish was flat. Um, Personally, what I would have liked to seen is maybe Gunther put Goldberg in the choke and then have Goldberg power out or something like that, and then roll over Goldberg in the choke still. He reaches for the rope. Um, Gunther could roll through and maybe pull him away from the rope, and even Goldberg could have broke free, kind of stood up, and then Gunther hit him in the knee that he'd been working. So he basically chop blocks him. So Goldberg falls to the knee, and then he locks it right back in. Gets him right in the center of the ring. Goldberg tries to power out again. He can't do it. He passes out. Match over. Um, I don't know if they like the whole show kind of got screwed up with the Seth injury. I don't know if that match was supposed to go longer, which in turn ended up making Gunther and Goldberg needing to go longer. And then since they didn't really have time to plan out a match that was longer, that led to everything in the timing wise becoming screwed up because they cut out Goldberg's retirement speech, which had to have fired him up after once he found out. Probably fired everyone up because the whole point of that was to give him his send off, and he didn't even get his send off really. Um, but I wanted to give a shout out as well to my friend Ryan. He actually attended All In Live. He told me it was a great show. It was hot as hell in that building. And most of their merchandise was sold out before he even got there, and he got there extremely early. He said he didn't understand why AEW didn't bring enough merchandise for 30,000 people, knowing there was going to be 30,000 people there. I was hoping to get an all in shirt, but he couldn't even get one. The lines were long. His girlfriend missed like the first two or three matches because she was in line and ended up with nothing. So just a huge shout out to him, giving me his login information so my wife and I could enjoy the show. He is a saint and all around good fellow. Um, I want to talk real quick, a little more housekeeping. Talk to Dr. Red Roberts again. I expressed my gratitude. I showed him, the numbers that his episodes pulled and how impressed, it was and he was of it. He linked me with a couple other guys regarding that era that he was in Florida. And so I texted them a little bit one day, and I don't know if like it was one of those things where we just were kind of going back and forth. And I know old school wrestling, like you have to prove yourself. So I wanted to be able to like talk to them in a way that shows them that, I am that type of person that you can joke, you can, have a conversation with. I thought it was all kind of just a test to see if I'm worthy of having an interview or meeting time or whatever with them. Um, I did say that my show Wolfgang Stories About Nothing had no definitive topic. I think if I can get all of these guys into one meeting, I think just basically it's going to be me going, "Hey, this is your boy Wolf, blah blah blah. Guys, go," and then it's just going to be them just talking about the business as it was when they were available. And so that's really all I hope for, and I think it's going to be a great show when we get that pulled off. Excuse me. As for my other guest, I'm still working on that. I haven't heard from him in a couple days. Um, Again, I don't want to give his name away because if this doesn't pan out, I don't want it to be anything where it's like, this guy no showed, this guy wasn't willing, whatever. It's not because of that. What I will say is that he just signed to return to the promotion that I said he's going to be a future Hall of Famer in. And I will say it involves fighting. And his next matchup is in September. So I'm thinking he might be going into training camp soon, and we might not be able to just sync up on a time to get going. But he is a huge wrestling fan. I think now, especially going into his career where he's going for his next matchup, I would love to have him on because their promotion leans more into the characters and less, I don't want to say less technical or, talent like that, but they do lean into more of the gimmick and the showmanship than the actual fights itself. Um, who knows? He might be after the others. I don't know. I'm still gonna just say, like, I hope that happens. Uh, I opened with a clip today of the WWF from January 1966. It was in Washington. I don't really know where Washington played in early WWE history, but I do know that they did run, I think it was their main show with Ray Morgan out of Washington, D.C. So that's why I showed that clip. I also showed it because it's not from WWE. Like that wasn't on the WWE network. WWE never posted it. I Someone just had a VHS or even an 8 millimeter of it and they converted it and posted it to YouTube. Um, I'm sure if you type in WWWF 1966, it'll pop up. It has two episodes. It's about an hour and 45 minutes long. And that was just the intro piece of it. So I think, it's interesting because that leads me into our vault topic, which is what I wanted to really discuss outside of all of that stuff now. And the one thing that I think that the WWE itself doesn't do enough of is promote their own history. We've seen lately that they're big on Jim Crockett Promotions, the NWA, the Georgia territory with the Omni. It's basically, the promotions that Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, the Horsemen, the Andersons, the Blanchards, all that, that's what they're promoting is that history, which I love, and I think it's great that WWE bought all this footage in order to bring wrestling history as a whole to modern fans. Um, but what I've noticed is that they really focus on territory history, specifically, like I mentioned, Crockett and Georgia. They should have like just a ton of their own footage that they just haven't even tried to convert, or maybe they did and lost it. Like they just really haven't explained why they're not showing their own history. I hate when people think that the WWE, WWF, WWF didn't really exist until Hulk Hogan. I was born in 85, so I was like really like at the almost at the start of Hulkamania. That was like maybe 2 years prior or a year and a half prior. Um, so it's like I lived through all of that and I, know everything. And, I'm the type of guy who doesn't like to see what I've lived through because I don't feel that's historically significant. I know I'm not, I know I'm probably the gross minority in that. And that what pains me is to see that the year 2000 obviously was 25 years ago. And so, like, that is considered history at this point. That's considered a generation. And so I get it, but they could really, really lean into the older history, especially, getting the ground running. You have all of this footage. I hope of, maybe Bruno's first title run. Let's talk about, him carrying the promotion on his back, Bruno walking with the WWF title so that way the guys today can run. So the women today could aim for the universe, because Bruno did all this. We really don't have anything from Bruno's first title run. We have those two episodes. I don't think he's on them. They mention him a few times and upcoming matches he has, but we don't really see any of that. I think the only other footage I've seen of his first run was 69, maybe 70, where there is a match I think is Bruno versus Killer Kowalski that I think's from somewhere in New York in 1969. Then we have footage of him and George Steele, and then footage of him versus one of the Mongols. I can't remember which name his was when he was a Mongol, but he later became Nikolai Volkov. So I really would love to see more of that. Second to that is Pedro Morales' entire title run. I mean, my goodness, this guy held the title for almost 2 years, and we really don't have anything. To the point where even people who lived during that time don't know why Bruno or why Pedro was champion for so long. They don't know because most of what they've seen is after the fact, when he was Intercontinental Champion almost a decade later, which I can attest to that he was pretty washed at that time. He was not in the shape that he was. Um, there really isn't a lot of Pedro footage just in general, which surprises me, considering how over he was during that time period. I don't know if this is true or not, but the reason he lost the title was nothing to do with like the attendance or anything like that. It was like to the point where they felt that the audiences at Madison Square Garden were going to riot anytime if he ever lost or anytime he started to get beat up. There were just like riots and just violence, and that's why he lost the title. And I think Philadelphia. It might have been somewhere else, but I'm trying to remember if that's the case. Um, but we don't really see anything. We can't judge for ourselves why Pedro Morales is historically significant. When Roman Reigns surpassed his time, it was like he was mentioned by name, but even people who lived in the 70s are going, well, what was so special about Pedro? Because we never saw him in his prime. I think now there is a All Japan match of him versus Giant Baba, which was right after he lost the WWF title. So it does show a little of what Pedro had to offer at that time. But I really would love to see more. Um, I think what's available is I've seen him beat Ivan. I don't remember if it was the full match or if it was like just clips, but I have seen that. That was on an old VHS that I had. Um, that had like a bunch of the world title histories. But it started with Hulk Hogan beating the Iron Sheik, and then it showed like short clip of the Ivan and Pedro match, and then it went right back to Hogan stuff. So really haven't seen much about that. The only other match I saw was right after he won the title. I don't know if it was his first challenger at MSG after or one of the first challengers, but it was Blackjack Mulligan, aka Bray Wyatt's grandfather. And so that's it. That's all I've seen of his title run. And I think there's also a match, and I'm trying to think where I saw it, but it was like a 4 or 5 minute clip of Pedro and Stan Stasiak at MSG, and I think they ended up going to curfew, but they only showed like the last 4 minutes of like a 55-minute match. And I think Stasiak beat him like a week later or something later. But this was like the MSG, like kind of preparing the New York crowd, saying Stan Stasiak went the limit with him, and then sometime later that week or the next week he lost the title to Stasiak. I would love to see more Stasiak footage. I know he only held the title for like 5 days, but I would love to see that build up. I also have not seen a lot of Stasiak footage outside of maybe his Portland stuff. Again, well after his prime, like 80, 81 is when I start seeing Stasiak footage. And so it would be nice to see that. Um, just talking about title changes in general, I am surprised that WWE hasn't done like a playlist of all the title changes, especially the WWE title, that they have available on tape or on film or whatever. Um, I think we can all agree that Bruno and Buddy Rogers was never taped. I'm honestly surprised there's not newsreel footage of that, but you know what? It is what it is, I think. And it really, at the end of the day, doesn't matter because it was a 58-second match. Um, the story behind it is more interesting than probably the actual match. So we don't really need to see it. But when you get into the Bruno and Ivan Koloff, there is footage of it. And I'm pretty sure it's the entire match or close to it. But it's on 8 millimeter film. And the person who found it or owns it or whatever, he decided to record over the footage with his commentary. And his commentary is so bad that it's unwatchable. And he did the same for what little footage was of Stasiak Bruno, where Bruno beat Stasiak for the belt. He did that too, and it is absolutely just unbearable. Like the footage quality is already not the greatest because, I mean, you're talking 1970s handheld 8 millimeter. It's not like our iPhones now where it recorded in high definition. It recorded in grainy, barely visible, footage. So it's already a hard watch that he just made even worse. I would love to see if WWE has their own footage of this, posting it out. I don't know if they actually taped Bruno and Ivan, because like the Pedro thing I mentioned earlier, I think that's what they were expecting. And so I think Vince Senior didn't or possibly did not tape that match because of the fact that he did not want on film a massive riot. And I don't think he was expecting, nobody was expecting, even Bruno, because he famously said that, he thought he blew out his eardrums or Ivan gave him a concussion when he dropped the bombs away knee drop on him, because it was so quiet. And, it had the opposite effect than I think what they were planning. Speaking again of Bruno and Pedro and having footage of Pedro, the two met in 1972 at Shea Stadium, talking about All In this weekend. That was pretty much what the setup was. It was a baseball Shea Stadium. It was a baseball stadium the Mets played in, and they had 24,000. I think it might have been as high as 29,000. I know it was in the 20s, and they wrestled 75 minutes. So here's the thing that I have heard about this match. I've heard one, potentially it was not taped because Vince Senior knew one of the two was going to get booed. Two, because he wasn't even sure how it was going to happen because they really didn't do babyface versus babyface at that time. This was completely out of the ordinary. This was a test run, and we still have yet to see the payoff of what this run was. Third, I heard the match was boring and that Vince Senior actually sent George the Animal Steel out unplanned to try to make this something interesting. And then I heard because Vince Senior thought it was so boring that the match was to never see the light of day. I don't know which is true. I don't know if any of it's true. I do know from what Pedro said, he said that was the greatest match he ever had. Bruno said he loved the match. He like was a little taken aback that he was getting booed, but again, at that time, Bruno was on the outs with Vince Senior over the Pittsburgh territory, and so Pedro was the guy in the WWF. He was the world champion. He was there at MSG every month. He was making all the towns, and Bruno wasn't really seen a lot. So I'm not surprised that he was booed or there was a mixed reaction for him. I think perfect time to show that one right now, especially given the culture and the dynamic of the fact where we have more shades of gray. We really don't play into the babyface heel stuff as much, and so I think right now showing that type of match, a seven, like even if you don't have all 75 minutes, which I don't know if they would because of just taping in general at that time. But I'm sure that we can have like 10, 15 minutes of this match somewhere on in the vault. Going back to speaking about WCW and WA footage, there is a specific Omni show that I would love to see, and it's purely for my own satisfaction. And it was December 10th, 1976, and it aired on HBO. And that was significant in itself because HBO aired the MSG shows for a while, that Vince McMahon commentated on. And so the only footage I've ever seen of this is when Bob Costas had Vince McMahon on his HBO sports show decades ago. I think it was late 90s, early 2000s. And they cut to this clip, and it's Vince McMahon and Gordon Soley in front of the ring at the Omni, and Vince introduces everything and Gordon. And I would just love to see this match because for my own personal preference, to see if Vince and Gordon commentated together, if they alternated, if that was all that was. I think it would just be great to see. I think it would just be interesting to see Gordon Soley and Vince McMahon together doing something, completely out of the ordinary. I don't even know why they did this. I'm sure if I looked it up more, I can find a reason. But it was never really explained. And there's footage. There's footage somewhere. I don't know if HBO owns it, and that's why it's never seen the light of day outside of the Bob Costas show. But man, I would love to get my hands on that just to hear Gordon and Vince have any type of interaction with each other. Because I don't know if they had any others, to be completely honest. Speaking of Vince, I know he's a hot topic now. We don't really like to talk his name and everything, but let's put the stuff aside for a second and let's talk about his first venture into commentary. The way I've heard it is Ray Morgan tried to hold Vince Sr. up for money. It was either the same day of an MSG show or if it was leading into an MSG show. And he basically, was like, "You're never going to find anyone to replace me." And Vince Sr., much, Vince, much like his father, um, just basically was like, "Hold my beer, I'll prove you wrong. Son, go out and do this." I would love to see that first show, that first, you know, foray into commentary. Don't know if like they saved that, didn't think it'd be any historically significant, but I would love to see Vince's like first year into commentary, like some type of introductory into his commentary, whether it's, them saying, welcome our new announcer, Vince, McMahon, blah, 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 or something. I do know there's some footage, I think from 74, which I think maybe a year or two after he took over. I'm not sure, but I know by 74, 75, he was already doing commentary for a few years. The only thing I've really seen in terms of Vince commentary from early on is the early championship wrestling episodes they had in the hidden gem section of the WWE network, where it was him and Antonina Rocca, Argentine Rocca, and that was a great time. So I again, just for historical significance context, I would love to see Vince McMahon's first year, something from his first year of commentary. Um, so I think when I think of the vault, I think of, the giant metal door like we've seen at like, safes and banks where they got the big, like almost like the pirate door where you spin it and then all of a sudden just, it's opens up and there's just dust and smoke and everything. But when you get to that first layer, it's all pretty clean. It's all, stacked and organized nicely. But then you get to those layers behind it. You get to the dust. You get deep into the murky waters of the safe, of the vault. And that's when you start pulling out the good stuff. That's when you find that rookie card that, your great great granddad owned that nobody's ever seen and is worth $5 million. That's what I'm thinking of, and that's what I feel WWE needs to do. They need to get away from their other competitors or the other promotions history, and they need to get get the hoe and start pulling apart all of the more recent history stuff and get into that deep stuff, the stuff that hasn't seen any sunlight in about 60 years. I know they probably have something, but who knows what they actually still have. I know back in the day, a lot of promoters would, record over tape because tape was expensive, film was expensive at the time. And so they would constantly tape over footage. And that's why a lot of the territory stuff doesn't really exist today, is because to save money, a lot of promotions would tape over and cycle through film. Memphis was one of the first, territories to really encapsulate and save all of their footage. And even up to that point, we really only have like 1980 on. We have some short clips of stuff from 77 and 78. So yeah, like I get it. There's probably not a lot of footage, but I can't imagine like Vince McMahon Sr. or any of those people like just deciding to throw away stuff. As far as I knew, the reason Kevin Dunn got a job was because he saved tape. That was basically how he got a job was I don't know if it was he saved tape or his father saved tape. Cornette knows the story better than I do, and because he's probably heard it so many times. But the story is that Kevin Dunn or his father or someone saved a lot of the tape from a fire, and that basically is how he got a job for life. So obviously there was some importance to footage in WWE history. I think they just need to focus on themselves more. I think with the WCW channel being on its own, I think that's where you post the Omni stuff. That's where you post the Crockett stuff. I know they're not the same promotion, but they pretty much they share a pretty similar history together. WCW was what Georgia Championship Wrestling was called, and the reason it became that once Ted Turner bought it was because he loved Georgia Championship Wrestling. He loved World Championship Wrestling. That was his promotion on his network. He didn't actually own the promotion, but he felt some type of ownership towards it. And so once everything kind of came together and we got the WCW we know of today, they really ended up just kind of merging their history together. And so the Georgia Omni footage, the Charlotte Coliseum and the Greensboro Coliseum footage, like that should go over there. WWE Vault, we live in a world now where we don't need to have specific times, like Raw at 8 o'clock. We like to have that type of, I guess, overarching time frame. But when you get to YouTube, you don't necessarily need to have a set time something airs. You just have something that drops. And so for the WWE Vault, we could have modern history and we could have vintage classics or, whatever you want to name them. We don't have to just do one a day. Like you can do an episode of Championship Wrestling from 1973 at 9 in the morning, and then you can do SmackDown from 2005 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. or whatever. And so I think that's the thing that we need to also get through is that with so much footage being available, maybe they just don't have a rhyme or reason to it yet, but there doesn't need to be. Like you can just post it, you can just put it out there as long as you're able to. I think you should. And I think that's what the WWE needs to do, and especially the Vault page. I'm going to tag them in this. I'm going to hope that they actually watch this. I know that they are always asking for suggestions or putting up a poll to see what more people want. I know they haven't read mine at all because there's been no real attempt at changing anything and putting more old school WWF footage out there. So maybe, this will gain traction. This video will reach the minds and the hearts of the WWE Vault, and we'll start seeing some more. That's all I can hope for. That's all I'm going to talk about today. This wasn't supposed to be a bashing of the Vault. Like there was no criticisms. I love the Vault page. It's still one of my favorited pages. It's still one of my most watched pages. These are just refinements or things that I think would make more of an impact in terms of what they're presenting right now. As always, this is going to kind of become my ending just because I always thought Jack Little, I wasn't alive for it, but watching the footage and just the way like he would just deadpan it, I feel like it's a good way for me to sign off. And, as I said, and as he said, that's all there is. There isn't any more. Until next time, guys, I'll see you then.